Have you ever had a side hustle? A side gig you picked up for fun, or maybe to earn a little extra cash? Maybe you had a lemonade stand as a kid, or like me, were fully immersed in the world of theater and dance, where each experience ignited my passion for the spotlight. As we transition from those early experiences into the professional world, some side gigs evolve into real passions, and sometimes even lasting careers. I've always been so curious about these stories, especially the less conventional journeys that redefine what a career can look like. They remind us that success isn't always a straight path, and that the heart behind our hustle can lead us to unexpected and fulfilling destinations. I genuinely love exploring how other people's passions have shaped their careers. If you're into that too, join me, Layla Palmer, as I chat with a captivating lineup of guests from various industries to uncover how they went from heart to hustle. Salut! Bienvenue! Cette semaine, nous allons entendre mon prof, Pierre Hurel, qui va nous parler de sa vie de musicien, de jazz. Whoa, sorry. I don't know what got into me. Let's start this again. Hi! Welcome back. This week we're hearing from Pierre Hurel, a jazz musician, music improvisation instructor, and my French professor. If you couldn't tell, Pierre is a Paris native, originally from the 7th arrondissement. He came to Boston years ago as a student, drawn to the captivating world of jazz. Lucky for us, he stayed well beyond his academic journey, and I had the chance to sit down with him in person to pick his brain about life as a musician and artist, and, well, about life in general. Our conversation got pretty philosophical, but that's only fitting when talking about the arts. I won't spoil too much, so without further ado, voici Pierre Hurel.
I'm Pierre Hurel. I came from Paris many, many years ago to study in Boston, and I liked it so much that I never left, and I still live in Boston. And I'm a pianist, composer, arranger, producer, but I'm also an artist. I paint, and I'm also a teacher, which is ironically how we met. But a lot of these activities that I do in my life have to do with communication and giving, I would say. Giving music, giving knowledge if you're teaching, sharing your paintings. And so I think a lot has to do with, the human interaction, the act of giving and sharing.
Well, you mentioned that your life spans music and teaching and painting and all these creative things. So what's that one thread that really connects them all?
The thread, it's not always easy to see the light and understand what it is, but I'm suspecting that the thread is a desire to express something. I think from a young age, I was always a very sensitive person. My mother used to say, tu es très sensible, peut-être trop sensible. You're very sensitive, maybe too sensitive, which of course I didn't like. But looking back, I have to admit that my senses were always very active. So I smell, I love to smell like wine, fragrance, the seasons. I love the winter, the smell of the winter. I love, of course, the fall. I love cooking, but I also love to touch. I know the difference between wool and cashmere and, or silk. I think all my senses. I'm a very visual person, but I'm also hearing details. Music is my primary language of expression. So I think the common thread may be this sort of hypersensitivity that had to find outlets. When you're very sensitive, everything touches you in a profound way. And if you do have an outlet, you can then translate or try to translate what it is that you have been feeling, noticing, sensing into some art form. And I think that's what attracts me to the arts in general. When I go to a museum, I see primarily my fellow humans having had an opportunity to express themselves, to express something they observed, like philosophers. We're all philosophers, we're all thinkers, we feel things very deeply. And the lucky ones have an outlet and they can express it. And I think that is probably the common thread, is the idea of expression is very important.
Yeah. That you have such a way with words.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you were from France. Mm-hmm. You moved here to come to school. So where did you go to school?
I went to Berklee.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's right.
Makes sense.
And it's kind of interesting because I went to Berklee as a summer program. And I was young. So when you're young, you sometimes you can be a little bit arrogant, or at least the concept of time is foreign to you as a young person. And so they had a summer program, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to Berklee one semester, and I'm going to figure out everything that I need to figure out about music. And at the end of the summer program, I called my parents in Paris, and I said, well, if I could stay maybe one more semester. I think with 2 semesters, I'll be done. I will know everything. And long story short, I went all the way and I continued to study music. I'm still studying music. And I think that's one of the great things about the arts, is that
you never stop learning.
You never stop. You never stop because the medium changes, but you change too. And this is something I really did not realize when I was younger, is the notion of cycle, just like the seasons, or when my wife was pregnant, noticing how her belly would change. And after 9 months, our baby was born and he was totally awesome and, with the little nails and everything. And I think life is full of these little moments, these cycles, So when you're young, sometimes you think, you're done. This is me. I believe this. I don't believe that. I want to do this. And it's lovely to have convictions, but what I knew about music then has nothing to do with what I knew even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But also, as I was saying, not because the medium changes, but your perception changes. You change as a person. When I see people around me, I can see where they are in relation to the movie of life. Some just entered the projection room and they're about to sit down. Some have been sitting for a little bit and they're eating their popcorn. And some are halfway through the movie. Some are getting very close to the end. And some are done. The movie just kind of ended. They are maybe retired. Maybe they don't seek the magic of life anymore. I hope it never happens to me. But I just think we go through all these cycles. For me, the realization that the study of music is endless, absolutely endless, is something that I didn't know when I was young. I thought you study something, you sort of crack the nut, you figure it out, you get to the bottom of things, and then you're done. Then you start touring or making a living from it and everything. But over the years, I realized that's not really how it happens. Fine, welcome to life, welcome to believing in something and betting on something.
You heard Pierre. He's been in Boston for quite a while. I've only been here for a few years, but I've always loved immersing myself in the live music scene. So I asked Pierre about the jazz clubs in Boston. And without realizing it, I walked right into a history lesson on the city's jazz scene. What started as a conversation about where to catch live jazz quickly turned into a reflection on the clubs that once defined Boston's nightlife, many of which are now just memories, as the city's fascination with the genre has faded over time. On the topic of jazz, because I have to ask, what do you think of Wally's Jazz Club? I've never been on Mass Ave.
Yeah. I haven't been in years. I never played there because they didn't have a piano. It's a very authentic place. It became, in the South End, this sort of hip because it was like the real thing. Back in the 80s, it was not like that. Back in the 80s, it was more like a real jazz club, like the 1369 in Cambridge or Ryles. These were just jazz clubs. They were still an interest. But Ryles doesn't exist anymore. 1369, a lot of these clubs actually closed. So jazz, you have to accept it for what it is. Jazz is not a popular form of expression. If I walk around Berklee, I could find 10 people who know about jazz and they know this performer, that performer. They know who was playing the bass on this record and who was the drummer. They're really excited about it, but that's not representative of real life. Real life is that most people don't listen to jazz. They don't really care about it. Some people think that jazz has become too intellectual, too complicated. And starting in the 50s, jazz starts to become far less commercial. Jazz used to be like you're a young person. If you were a young person in the 20s and you went dancing with your friends, you were listening to jazz. That was the music.
That's what I still look for today. To go out dancing, love it, but I'm not into the vibe of the music these days. I like something more that I can like actually groove and move my body to.
Yeah.
So I definitely gravitate toward jazz. I listen to jazz when I study.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're one of the few people who carry the torch of this great, I mean, it's such a rich form of music. You know, we always talk about classical music. I'm really into classical music. My students are mostly classical musicians at the conservatory, and I listen to classical music all the time, and I play classical music. But jazz, which is profoundly different, although you could say music is music, but profoundly different from classical music, is such a rich form of expression, punctuated by true geniuses, creative people like Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. Amazing geniuses, you know, the music they have left behind, we call them standards, jazz standards, and everyone is playing them to this day. Everyone is recording them. And it's funny because we call them standards, but they're less and less standards for people because they don't know. You know, jazz musicians will be like, we should close with a well-known tune, like a well-known jazz standard. And you can go along, you can say, sure, that's famous, but it's famous for
who?
For, you know, people who lived in the 60s maybe, but it's no longer really a tune that people would know. So it's kind of funny how that has changed as well.
I met Pierre in the fall of 2024 when he taught my French class. Easily one of the best experiences I've had learning a foreign language. But teaching French is just a side gig for him. His main focus? Leading classical improvisation classes at the Boston Conservatory at Berklee. In fact, his classical improv workshop is coming up on its 20th anniversary. Let's hear more about how it all started and what has kept it thriving for 2 decades. So why don't you talk about your teaching? Mm-hmm. You teach an improvisation workshop that is coming up on its 20th anniversary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So why don't you talk about that?
I'm very happy to talk about this. You will have to stop me if I talk too much about it. Because in 2004, I was already teaching at the Boston Conservatory. I was teaching French there. I was teaching a French course to singers. Singers have to study Italian, German, and French because they need to sing the repertoire, the classical repertoire. And I gave them a proposal around 2002, to do an improv workshop, to teach improvisation. And I did it because I was hanging out with a lot of classical musicians. My wife is a classical pianist. And I noticed that classical musicians had the heart, the chops, the desire, but somehow they would rather die than be asked to improvise anything because they're so used to preparing things. You have the score, you open it, you look. If you're a pianist, you check the fingering, okay, with your pencil and eraser. Okay, on this A flat, I think I'm going to do 3, and then 4, then 1. Like you really think of the details, and it's a wonderful art form, but you don't spend any time improvising, which is ironic because the composers who wrote these pieces of music that they're playing today, the Chopin, the Mendelssohn, the Liszt, the Bach, of course, Mozart, Beethoven, all these people, all the way to the 20th century, people like Ravel or Debussy, all these people were great improvisers. So composers were improvisers. But somehow in the mid-1800s, more or less, musicians started to pursue the art of playing other people's music without being themselves composers. And so they were not improvisers because those skills were not needed. Give me the score, I will learn it, I have the chops, I have the intelligence to figure out what's going on, and I will play it. But back in the day, it was less perfect in a way. The playing was less perfect. But in any case, I thought I should do it. It would really change their life. And it did. That's really what happened. I started in 2004. I had 1 section. Then very soon I was given 2 sections. Right now I have 4 sections. In September, we're going to have 5 sections. The classes fill out very quickly. You need to send a permission request because I need to give you permission because I have only 10 students. So I need to make sure that I don't have, 9 flutists or 8 violinists. So I'm trying to have at least 1 percussionist, a couple pianists, some string players, maybe brass, like trumpet, trombone, some woodwinds, to make a coherent group. In fact, last night I closed the semester. I was talking after a class with students. What we really discuss, on paper, we discuss non-idiomatic improvisation, which is improvisation that doesn't belong to a particular idiom. Like French is an idiom, English is an idiom, but Baroque is a medium, and romantic music is an idiom. You have certain rules for different styles. So what we're trying to do is like you play, you pull out your flute, and this person pulls out a smaller instrument, maybe a bass, and you're at the piano. How do you improvise out of thin air? You never rehearsed it. You never discussed it. Very different from jazz. Very different from jazz. You never rehearsed anything. How do you make music? I was talking about expression. I was talking about communication. When you study non-idiomatic improvisation, you really study the art of listening. You talk, so you believe in what you have to say, and then you listen to the other person. So for my young musicians, it's a life-changing experience because it makes them think about the music, but it also makes them think about the purpose. Like, why do we do these things? Why do you make music? What is the point? If you overplay somebody, if you play too loud or too much, you overwhelm the other person. Is that really fun for the other person? I'm going to guess not at all. If you underplay, if you're so, it's not that you're respectful, but you're almost, you don't believe in yourself enough. You don't stand up for yourself enough. That's not good either, because the other person is like, give me something, talk, play, do something. So you start to work on the psychological dimension of making music with others, which makes you a much better player. You start to really think about, why are we doing this right now? And also, you start to become more aware of others, and you learn respect. In French, le respect. In Latin, speciere, to see. Respecire is to see around. So to be respectful is to see around, to realize that there are other people around, that you should acknowledge the existence of other people. So when you play with other musicians, you really want to be hyper aware of others, because it's the group that matters. And how can you be a good group member is really what we're studying. It's the class I wish I had when I was their age. It's a class where you're asked to play, but you're asked to think, you're asked to articulate your thoughts, because you see, we play and then we critique.
Our conversation didn't just stay within the realm of music. Pierre spoke about something much deeper, the importance of acknowledging the pleasure of life itself. He connected this idea to improvisation, explaining that just as a musician must be fully present and aware of what's happening around them to improvise with others, we too have to be present in our own lives to truly experience its beauty. What started as a discussion about music turned into a reflection on life, art, and the simple joy of being in the moment.
It's an incredibly interesting art form to study improvisation. And I do that also in my work as a painter. My work is really abstract expressionist. It's not figurative, so you won't recognize what you're looking at. But if you allow yourself to observe and to sort of feel the vibrations between the colors, you may feel something. For me, this is the kind of artwork that touches me the most. When I was a teenager, I was into surrealism. I was into impressionism in my late teens. But now, this has been for many, many years. The type of art that moves me the most is abstract expressionism. It corresponds to a particular sensibility that I have, and the freedom that you have, because you're not looking at an animal or a steeple or a woman. You're not looking at things you would recognize. You're just looking at a combination of shapes, colors, contrasts, forms, and you look at it. And if you let yourself go, if you relieve yourself from the imaginary responsibility that it has to make sense, that it has to represent something, then you can really feel things very deeply, actually. It's really wonderful. My mother would say, when she would look at my work, she would say, qu'est-ce que ça représente? What does it represent? And of course, it doesn't represent anything, because it is not figurative. It's not an apple. It's not anything. It's colors, shapes, contrast, and all these things. But if you ever find a painting of that type, of that style of painting, that moves you, it really connects you with the magic of life. You don't even know why you're so moved by painting. Motherwell was one of the great abstract expressionists, American, Robert Motherwell, and he was one of the leaders of the movement. They used to have a painting at the MFA that I would go see almost weekly. Pretty large painting, blue, black line, very, very simple. But as luck would have it, there was a little bench in front of it. And I would go straight to the American wing of the MFA, to the top floor, and I would sit there. And it was sort of a meditation on looking at this painting. I can't really tell you why it was moving me so much, because I don't know the answer. But it connects you to all these things in life that you can't quite explain. Things move you in a particular way. Taste, visual things you hear. It's a very personal thing. Why is it that this movie so did it for you and doesn't do anything for this other person? It's one of those things that we can't really explain, but it's kind of magical, and it's kind of beautiful, I think. Yeah.
You're right. It's definitely like an inexplicable thing.
Yeah.
You can't describe with words the feeling.
Yeah, that's right.
It's almost like love. Like
yes.
You're so in love and you love someone or something so deeply that you don't even have the words to describe that.
It's funny you would use the word love, because I'm so with you on this. Sigmund Freud, soon before he passed away, when he was asked, you have listened to a million people talk, you have analyzed a million things, dreams, conversations. What have you learned? What would you say? And his words, it was translated from German, but loosely translated, he said love and work. Those two things. And as I get older, I can see what he meant. Because when you think of love, you could think of romantic love, but you could also think of loving life, loving a good meal, loving to cook, loving to hold hands with a person, loving to go for a walk. There's a way of being engaged with the world, but you have this moment of acknowledging the magic of life, which never stops to amaze me. And it's funny because I was raised as a religious person. I was a Catholic, but I moved away from it in my 20s, like some people do. But there are many times today when I'm still completely amazed, blown away, as they would say, by the magic of life, the beauty of life. The magic, when I see nature, fish, the colors, the birds, forget it. How is that even possible? This just came about like that. It's completely amazing. Music, cuisine, life is just completely magical. I mean, it's just, you may not see it because maybe you're wearing the wrong lenses, or maybe the lenses you have built over the years are, tainted to a point where you really don't see. You need to find a different pair of lenses, or maybe put these down, which is not easy as you get older, I find. But if you have been constantly allowing yourself to be amazed by the magic of life, it really is. It's incredible. It's incredible. The seasons, the fact that you can see, the fact that you can hear, all these amazing senses that we have and that you can share. So I think the word love that you mentioned, I think love is a big part of it. I always feel like teaching is an act of love. Making music is an act of love. Cooking is an act of love. There's a lot of magic in life. If you remove the art, then we're really in trouble.
I think about that all the time. Like, imagine a world without music, or something as simple as like the birds singing.
That's right.
When you're taking a walk. It does fundamentally change the human experience.
Yeah, for sure. And it connects you with people who came before you. This is also something we're talking about, cycles. This understanding of, like, if you study cuisine, you're really standing on the shoulders of people who came before you, who invented this particular technique, this dish and everything. In music, same thing. You're never creating things out of thin air. People came before you, and so you have the history of it, which also helps. If you study the arts, you realize that you go through life pretty quickly. I used to hear this when I was a young person like you, and I don't think I understood it, but now I'm starting to really understand it, that life, really, you don't live forever. You're here, and it's completely miraculous that we're alive. Don't get me started on that too. It's completely miraculous that you're alive, that somehow you survived, your parents survived, all sorts of things that could have happened. Somehow you got a chance to live. And if you're lucky, you fall in love with something, an art form, an activity. It doesn't have to be the arts. It could be anything, really. I see life as this giant, these restaurants where you have all-you-can-eat buffet. To me, that's life. Life is all you can do, all you can experience buffet. There's so much.
Beautiful. After a conversation that touched on music, creativity, and the art of truly being present in life, it's clear that for Pierre, improvisation isn't just a technique. It's a way of living. But I wanted to learn even more about his journey, so I asked him to stick around for a few more minutes. It's time for the Career Countdown, a segment here on Heart to Hustle that offers us one last glimpse into our guest's journey in a fresh, inspiring way. Through 5 rapid-fire questions, Pierre will share the creative inspirations and personal moments that have shaped his career and artistic path. Let's dive in. So let's start with number 5. What are 5 tools or instruments, and this could be literally or metaphorically, that you can't live without?
And this will seem funny, but a metronome. I have a really good relationship with my metronome. A tool that is a metaphor of a tool is meditation. I think meditation is very important, precisely because meditating is a great way to disconnect yourself from the narrative, the imaginary stories you tell yourself about the world, about yourself. So it's nice to empty your mind. 3, obviously, my piano. I don't know what my life would have been without my beloved piano. When I was younger, I was a tortured Parisian romantic. I would get my heart broken all the time. I don't know how many times the piano cheered me up and helped me go through life. So definitely piano. Canvases and painting equipment or drawing equipment. If I couldn't draw, if I couldn't paint, I think life would be terrible. And the last one, it would be YouTube. I love YouTube. I cannot tell you how much I love YouTube.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, an answer I wasn't expecting, but
Yeah.
I can relate to.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 4, what are 4 qualities that every great musician or artist needs to be successful?
The first one is tenacity, resistance, and go through resistance. Like, it's not easy. You have days where you could cry. You have days where you could get really discouraged. So tenacity is one of them. To have patience, to realize that you practice this today, you practice these 2 measures, they're not coming through quite well. It's Monday, you do it Tuesday, look, it's a little bit better. Within a week, you can really play them. So I think patience one. 3, be able to connect with others. You need to be able to pick up the phone or pick up, your Gmail and send emails and send, you need to make these connections with people. For some, it's very easy. For others like me, it's very hard. I always find it difficult to sell anything. I could sell other people's work more easily, I would think, but to sell your own work is difficult. So definitely ability to connect with others. And 4, and it's very important, is your ability to pay attention to details. If you meet directors, chefs, bakers, musicians, sooner or later you're going to start to notice the importance of details. If you're going to be sort of flying over the experience, you're going to wake up feeling like, how come I don't know this? How come I never noticed this? It's because I think you need to really pay attention to details. Details really matter.
So number 3, this is going to be fun. If your life were painted on a canvas, what would be the 3 dominant colors and why?
So definitely black. Matisse, a French painter, was one of the most important painters to realize and teach us, people who came after him, the importance of black when you use other colors. Black is a way to punctuate different colors and to exacerbate the vibration between different colors. So black, you would have to have it. Because I would want black, I would also want white. So definitely white would be one of them. The third one is difficult because I find that, again, going back to this notion of cycles, I think 10 years ago, my response would have been maybe different from what it is. I am going through a sort of a reddish, pinkish period. But, a year ago, I might have said blue, because blue is also one of my favorite colors. When I was younger, yellow. But see, now yellow, the pigment is getting close to red, to orange first and then red. So it's difficult for me to give you three exactly. Definitely black, definitely white, and at the moment, red hues. Yeah, I would say.
Number 2, what are 2 roadblocks that you've encountered on your creative path that taught you something valuable?
Yeah. First one, discouragement. I think it has taught me that you have to be persistent. Artists can be really self-critical. And even very famous artists, for example, Bill Evans, very famous jazz pianist, his producer talks about Bill Evans and says, I've never met someone who was more insecure than Bill Evans. And that tells you something, because to the outside world, with a few good photos, they got a lot of great photos of Bill Evans, with the glasses hunched over on the piano. Maybe you would never imagine this to be the case, but the reality is that, yes, he was insanely insecure. He doubted himself. A lot of musicians doubt themselves. So I think this sense of self-doubt reminded me that you need to stay with it. The second roadblock, I hate to admit it, but I come to an age where I have to admit it, is a lack of knowledge of the business of things, business of music especially. I think if I were to advise young people, I would say, it doesn't matter what you play. In fact, Berklee has a lot of classes for the business of music. I think it's very important. You should be able to read a contract. You should be able to know how to protect your music, especially these days. Good luck. It's much more difficult now with the internet. So, yeah, knowing the legal aspects of what it is you do.
So, final question, number 1. If you could bottle your career as a vintage French wine, what would you name it, and what would the label say?
Okay, so I had to think of this. This will surprise you for a musician. I would probably call it, because I like the sound of it, Chateau. I would call it Chateau. Why not? It would be like a great Bordeaux, maybe. Chateau du Silence, which is counterintuitive, because why would a musician want to create a wine that would be called silence? But actually, one, there's silence in music. You have pauses, and the music that comes right after has so much more power because there was silence before. But essentially, it's because there's some kind of wisdom that comes from being silent and from stopping the narrative in your mind and not talking, which is ironic because right now I'm being interviewed, so I'm doing all this talking. But I do like silence a lot. And it may be the reason why I love to paint. Because when I paint, I don't turn on the music. I paint in silence. You can just hear the brushes brush against the canvas. That's all you can hear. So, Chateau du Silence. In terms of description, I think I would put, and we haven't talked about this, but I would put plaisir, confusion, et clarté. So pleasure, confusion, and clarity. Pleasure, because I think that one of the primary forces, one of the primary motivators is the pleasure of connecting with the canvas, the pleasure of seeing your work when it's done, the pleasure of going through the process of creating work. And then I chose these two opposite, or are they opposite, which is confusion et clarté. I feel pretty clear about the fact that I'm confused at this stage of my life. I've accepted confusion. I've accepted that there are things you're not supposed to explain. And in that sense, I'm very clear.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. I knew Pierre would have incredible insights on music and art, but I didn't expect to walk away feeling like I just had a philosophical awakening. He really has a way with words. Maybe it's the French upbringing, maybe it's the artist in him, or maybe I just got lucky enough to sit across from someone who sees the world through such a poetic lens. Either way, this conversation was a reminder that whether through music, art, or just how we move through life, being present, embracing the moment, and acknowledging the beauty around us is what makes this experience of life so worthwhile. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. It really helps others find the podcast. And on that note, it's the end of the episode. We'll see you next week. Until then, thank you for listening.